from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Twitter starts to ban people who impersonate others. Musk saying to vote Republican. And some of the employees laid off last week, well, some are being asked to come back to the office. Plus, China's COVID policies are undermining Apple's plans. Our Bloomberg scoop on the plan to cut iPhone production by millions of units. And FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr thinks the U.S. government should ban TikTok. Why and how far will he go to make it happen? He'll join us to explain. We're going to get to all of that in a moment, but first I want to get a look at the markets. Tech stocks rallying for a second day, taking time to find their feet ahead of key U.S. midterm elections. Earnings season also continuing. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow here with the big moves. Ed.
Yeah, and the big moves in Lyft, you look at that performance after hours, were down more than 12%. And it's interesting, Lyft beat on the bottom line in the quarter, but ridership growth really disappointing. The company added 20.3 million active riders in the third quarter, but the estimate from the street was 21.1 million. How different a story is that for Lyft compared with Uber, which just a week ago or so grew its ridership by 22% and had financial outperformance as well. So Lyft giving us a pretty worrying picture about that company, now down 13% in after hour. You're right, it was kind of a slow-moving day, to be honest with you, in financial markets. The NASDAQ 100 up for the second straight day, only the second two-day gain for about 10 sessions. But there was some outperformance, particularly in semiconductors. This at a time where yields continue to push higher. You look at the US 10-year Treasury at 4.2%. And also Bitcoin. I actually posed this question on Twitter, so if you have a good answer to this, at me. But Bitcoin trading in this kind of narrow range for much of the last 2 weeks between 20,000 and 21,000 US dollars per token. Why? We've seen so much in the news flow, much from the Fed, earnings season, a lot of sort of nervousness across financial markets, but Bitcoin's kind of holding in this narrow range and pretty steady. There was a slew of technology news to digest on Monday as well. Separate and without any sort of hard news peg was Tesla, which was the clear laggard across technology shares, particularly on the NASDAQ 100, down 5%, closing at its lowest level since June of 2021. We'll dig into that later in the program. Apple actually closing up 0.4%. It had been lower for much of the session and on track for a sixth consecutive day of declines. That's following a Bloomberg scoop that Apple is paring back its iPhone shipment target by 3 million units this year, according to sources. Much of that to do with a weakness in demand for the lower-end handsets, but also the company coming out with a statement Sunday saying that COVID lockdowns in the Zhengzhou region, where Foxconn actually assembles much of the Pro models, is going to impact the supply side of this equation. And then you look at Meta Platforms, up 6.5%, having its best jump since July after a media report that we're on track for actual layoffs to come out of Meta this week. I think you've got more on that story.
We do, Ed. Thank you. In addition to that, Twitter asking some laid-off employees to come back and beginning to permanently ban users who impersonate real people. Meantime, as Ed said, Meta reportedly cutting thousands of jobs as soon as this week. Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner joins us to talk about this more. And Kurt, of course, you've been very busy covering both Meta and Twitter. Let's start with Meta and get that out of the way. Is Meta planning to lay off thousands of people this week? What do we know?
Yeah, I mean, the company is obviously not confirming anything, but, pointing people to what Mark Zuckerberg has said previously on earnings calls, which is that they are planning for cuts, right? And that this is something that he's also told employees at an all-hands meeting just a few months ago, is that the company is going to look a lot smaller at the end of 2023 than it is, right now in 2022, right? So all of those things seem to suggest that something like this is coming. Obviously, I think they could probably learn a thing or two from what happened at Twitter over the past week in terms of how not to handle a situation like this with employees and all the information that is shared. I imagine Meta will probably be a little bit more structured in whatever they ultimately end up doing, but it does feel like something like this is probably coming very soon.
So let's talk about what is actually happening then at Twitter. You, of course, reported that more than 3,700 people would be laid off. Has that happened? Have all of those people been told? And is Elon Musk really trying to get some of those people back? And if so, how many?
Yeah, so there were massive layoffs that started kind of Thursday night of last week. Employees started losing access to their internal systems like email and Slack and things like that. And on Friday, we saw the bulk of the layoffs happen. I believe the internal kind of employee they tracked the number of employees at the company internally, and there's it's around 3,700, 3,800 employees right now, which was down from about 7,500 at the beginning of the year, right? So thousands of people have been cut in just the last couple days. And as you mentioned, Emily, yes, when you do something so drastic so quickly, there were mistakes that were made. There were some employees who were laid off who were done so accidentally. There were some who were laid off that the company then realized, oh boy, we actually need them. We need their expertise in the building. And so we're told that dozens of employees were approached over the weekend and even heading into today about returning. I don't know of anyone who's actually accepted that offer. I think it's going to be a tough sell to convince someone who was just fired to essentially go back to the company that just fired them, even if it was a mistake.
Meantime, Musk has said there'll be an independent board focused on content moderation, but it looks like some users are already being banned for impersonating real people. Parody accounts, as you know, have been quite popular on Twitter for many, many years. Talk to us about what's happening here.
Yeah, not just impersonating real people, but impersonating Elon Musk, right? That seems to be the line that a lot of people are crossing. But what's interesting here is, Elon, when he was talking about buying this company, he said he didn't believe in lifetime bans, right? That was sort of part of his thing. He was like, when I get in, I'm gonna remove these things. He's taken a softer stance since then, and said that he's going to review these with sort of an outside counsel. We don't know who's on that counsel. We don't know if they've actually had any conversations yet. But it is interesting that he's sort of kind of crossing this line here and saying, hey, if you're impersonating someone, we're going to boot you. I have to imagine, this is coming from a lot of the pushback he's getting on this blue check verification process we've been talking about, Emily, which is where if you pay $8 a month, you're soon going to be able to have kind of that blue check mark next to your name. Historically, that's been to verify that you are the actual person who you claim to be on the account. But now it seems like you're just going to be able to buy that check for the $8 without any actual verification of your identity. So that's probably why he's now trying to get ahead of people who are impersonating both himself, but presumably other, famous or well-known users.
And then last quick question, because I just have to ask, he is now encouraging voters to vote Republican, and also went to great lengths to say he is a registered independent. He's voted entirely Democrat until now. Why is he going this far?
Well, he claims in his tweet that the White House is run by a Democrat president, and so to counterbalance that power, we should have Republicans who are running or controlling Congress. But this is something that's been sort of a change for him over the last couple of months. He told employees at an all hands in June that he voted Republican for the first time. It feels like he is sort of swinging that way. It's just very interesting, Emily, that he would come out and say it so bluntly like this. Could you imagine, for example, if Mark Zuckerberg came out and took a very strong political stance like this, right? I feel like people would be absolutely up in arms, losing their mind over that. But, the fact that it's Elon Musk, and the fact that he's saying vote Republican, and those are typically conservatives seem to be the ones who typically have the biggest issue with these social networks and the speech on them. I feel like maybe people are okay with that, given the stance that he's taken here.
Right. It's wild indeed when you put it that way. Okay, Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, thank you. We'll continue to follow your reporting. I do want to dig into another Bloomberg scoop from this weekend. Apple expecting to make at least 3 million fewer iPhone 14s than originally planned for the year. Our Mark Gurman broke that story, joins me now. Mark, why is Apple making these production cuts?
So two things going on here, right? You have the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus, which are the lower end phones, and then you have the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which are the higher end phones. Now, in terms of the 3 million units for that production cut that we wrote about, going from 90 million through the year to 87 million, that's because of softer demand that has plagued those two lower end iPhone 14s really from the beginning of their release, right? The iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max, that's a supply issue. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, Apple put out a warning discussing how their outlook for iPhone units sold is going to be lower than anticipated because of the output at their Foxconn facility for those two particular models in China going mostly offline due to COVID protocols. So clearly there's both a supply and demand issue depending on which models of the iPhone 14 you're looking at.
How will this impact the company's outlook, Mark? I mean, you've reported about, spending being more. Tim Cook told us he was going to be more deliberate about spending. Then you've been getting pretty granular in your reporting about what roles they plan to cut, what roles they plan to keep. How does this fit into Apple's bigger picture?
Yeah, right now, it seems pretty clear that revenue for the holiday quarter, which they'll announce at the end of January, this quarter runs through December 31, 2022, it's going to come in a little bit lower than expected, right? When Apple held their earnings about a week ago, they didn't know this was the case. The COVID-19 related lockdowns, that was just emerging in the days after that. That's why they had to put this statement out over the weekend to indicate that there is some sort of change here from what they spoke about previously. Now, the good news for Apple, from a financial regulation standpoint, they didn't give any formal guidance. They didn't say our revenue is going to come in between X amount and X amount. They said that growth is going to come in slower than the 8% we saw in the fourth quarter, right? And then Luca Maestri, the Apple CFO, was asked, does that mean you're going to see an annual decline from the holiday quarter? He said it's just going to be less than 8%. So that could mean 7% or that could mean negative 2%, right? We really won't know until they announce those results. But certainly it seems like the numbers are going to come in lower than the $128 billion of revenue that Wall Street had been looking for the holiday quarter, because their most important product, the iPhone 14 Pro line, that's going to come in lower than expected because of lower shipments and also means delays for deliveries for consumers.
All right, we're going to continue to follow your reporting on this, Mark. Thank you so much for all of those updates. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, lots to digest. Meantime, the CEO of the tech identity giant Okta joins us to talk about how the looming recession is impacting sales and his thoughts on Elon Musk's take on verification. Next, this is Bloomberg. How to secure and protect online identity has only become more important as more businesses go all in on a digital world. This week, the cloud identity software provider Okta is holding an investor day to talk about the future of our digital identities, along with its biggest customer event of the year. Joining me now, Okta CEO and co-founder Todd McKinnon. Todd, great to have you back here as always. So look, everyone is talking about the outlook right now. It seems like every company is laying off folks. We're expecting potentially thousands of layoffs at Meta alone. What are you seeing in the sales environment in terms of the appetite to buy your software and enterprise software right now?
Well, the first thing we're really excited about is the appetite for folks to come to this conference. It's the first time we've had our Octane event in person in 3 years, and the whole thing is sold out. We're oversubscribed. That's both from our customer event, our investor event. So people are incredibly interested in this topic, and what do you know? They like to be together in person, which is a powerful platform for us to start telling the story. And as you mentioned, Emily, this is a different world than we were in a year ago. Everyone is worried about the economic uncertainty. Everyone is really scrutinizing their investments to make sure that they spend their dollars on the things that are going to move their businesses forward. And the good thing for us, as they make those decisions, identity is coming up as a very strategic initiative they should invest in.
What is your outlook given the macro environment, Todd, and how are you thinking about jobs and spending? Are you planning any layoffs? Are you planning to cut back anywhere?
We are not planning layoffs, but like every other company, we're really scrutinizing where we're investing, and we think our team is a great investment. They're the best in the industry, and they're going to help our customers be successful. But across the board, everyone is trying to do more with less, make sure that every dollar we spend is in the highest ROI area. And what you see from our customers is that they're getting a huge return on their investments in identity. It's not just for security, and it's not just for IT productivity, it's also for customers. They can build better customer relationships, they can drive new revenue channels, and that's what you want to do when there's a time of economic uncertainty. You want to make sure you cut costs and have good investment in terms of what you're spending your money on, but you also have to drive growth, because a lot of times that's when you can get ahead of your competitors. When they're cutting back, you can invest in the right areas and move forward.
Meantime, digital authentication services are still a huge prize for hackers, of course. We've talked about the hack that Okta had to deal with earlier this year. Twilio also dealing with one as well. How would you say the threat level has changed, and what are you doing to stay on top of it?
Well, one thing that doesn't change is that whether there's economic uncertainty and how people are thinking about investments, the risk from security breaches and the regulatory overview that comes when there's a security breach and the cost that puts on companies, that is consistent. That's always there. So companies have to invest in their cyber posture, and they have to make sure they have a great foundation to keep everything secure. They, of course, have to make sure they're spending the right investments and getting the best innovation for that money. But cybersecurity is something it's recession resistant.
I'm curious what you think of Elon Musk's approach to verification, this idea of knowing your customer, proving identity, when others are saying this is just a way to pay to play.
Well, I think that Twitter is a great technology company. It's changed the world. And even a company like Twitter has to do a better job connecting with their customers, whether that's figuring out who gets the blue check mark, whether that's figuring out what's a bot and what's not a bot. These things in the takeover of Twitter, and as Elon comes in to run the company, these things have come up over and over again. So it just goes to show you, if Twitter has these challenges and these opportunities they could reap the benefits of getting to know their customers better. Think about every other company, every other organization in the world. If they can know their customers, if they can build great products and service for them that validate the right users, get them into the right capabilities, that's going to be really a groundswell for every organization in the world. And that's what everyone's trying to do. And that's why it all comes back to identity, because you have to know who that customer is. You have to have high confidence in it so you can deliver that customer a great personalized experience that changes their day, makes them perceive a ton of value from your product or service, and moves your company forward.
He's also telling users to vote Republican, and I know federal government sales are important to Okta. How do things change for you if Congress, Republicans win Congress? Does that make a difference for Okta?
Well, one thing I want to say is I voted today. So you can see my I voted sticker.
Good for you. Love it. There you are.
We have
there you
this
got it
big
right
conference. We have this big conference, so I had to do it early, absentee. But all I'll say on this is that everyone needs to vote. Democracy works when everyone is heard, so everyone should vote. It's an important part of what we do. It's an important part of our country, and it's an important part of the world. So get out there and vote.
All right. I can only support that. Look, you've got a huge customer event coming up, an Investor Day. You've been talking about this passwordless future for a really long time. What are you telling them about how far away that really is? When are we all going to be done with passwords?
This is one of the most exciting things that's happening in the industry. We are on the cusp, especially at work, of being able to get rid of passwords. Okta has the technology today to remove the password from every employee in the world. And that's because two things. One is that we can utilize the strong authentication from their iPhone or their Android phone or from their Mac or their PC and integrate that. And this is an important point. It has to be integrated to every application and service you need to go in your entire workday. And that's what's challenging. It's not that we didn't have the right biometric sensors, is that it was hard to get these biometric sensors connected to everything in your environment. And that's the problem we solve. And so this is an exciting development. I think we can make employees much more productive. And more importantly, if it's a biometric sensor, it's much more secure. And that's why we're excited to tell our story to the world this week.
All right. Well, good luck at Octane this week. Okta CEO and co-founder Todd McKinnon joining us for an exclusive interview. Todd, thanks so much for stopping by. All right. Coming up, we're going to hear from Microsoft President Brad Smith from COP27 in Egypt. We're going to talk about Microsoft's new climate initiatives and how the company is also navigating the downturn. That's next. This is Bloomberg. The COP27 summit is underway in Egypt, with this year's event providing a chance to re-inject momentum into the energy transition. Heads of states and governments all in attendance, as well as major companies like Microsoft, which plans to be carbon negative by 2030. I caught up with Microsoft President Brad Smith. Take a listen.
I think it's really important to think a little bit about the problem that we and others are trying to help solve. So much of the work that is needed, especially to adapt to climate change, really involves better use of AI, more data, better predictive modeling. You look at predicting wildfires, whether you're in the United States or India or in Africa. If you look at things like responding to floods, you need to be able to predict these things and then give people early warning systems. Yet, if you look at Africa today, for every 14 data scientists that there are in developed countries, there's only one in Africa. So we've opened up, we're announcing today, 2 new data labs, one in Egypt, one in Kenya. We're partnering with Planet Labs in San Francisco, which is doing, I just think, this extraordinary work with new satellites to bring satellite-based imagery and data, including for Africa. You put our AI capabilities, our data scientists, Planet's imagery together, now we can be a bit of an equalizer. We can help climate scientists on a continent like Africa.
Now, meantime, Brad, the economy continues to go south. We're seeing layoffs in the tech industry across the board. We're expecting thousands of people to get laid off at Meta just this week. I know Microsoft has done some layoffs, but hasn't had a major round of cuts yet. Are you planning to do more layoffs? And how are you thinking about spending, et cetera?
I think the most important thing for a company like Microsoft is first to recognize the role that we play. We're not in the advertising business to the degree that some of the other companies are. We're more focused on really providing the digital infrastructure that companies, businesses, nonprofits, governments need. So in a world with increasing economic headwinds, and there are many, the kind of technology that we create is one of the better tailwinds on which people can rely, and we're seeing that. So to answer your question, Emily, we will continue, I think, to manage through this recession the same way we have managed through every recession since Microsoft was founded in 1975. We identify the technologies that will not only be important to the quarter and the year, but fundamentally the decade ahead, and we'll make sure that we invest, and we may even invest more in the technologies of the future, say things like artificial intelligence. Now, we may have to trim some other cost areas because it is a recession, but I think what you'll do is see us trim if we need to, and then use that to free up resources to invest in what we regard as the long-term creation of value, not only for ourselves, but for our customers.
FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr coming up next, calling for a ban on TikTok. He's with us next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Twitter may now be a private company, but Elon Musk's purchase of the social media platform is still being felt by the public markets. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow here with a look at Tesla. And obviously, can't ignore this if you're a Tesla investor, Ed.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, the stock is down almost 50% on a 12-month basis. It's at a 17th month, new 52-week low, down 5% during Monday's session, worst performer on a points basis on the NASDAQ 100. And clearly there's a Twitter overhang, right? I think one of the numbers that jumps out at me is that Tesla shares are down more than 12% since October 27th, when Musk closed the deal to buy Twitter. In that time, the S&P 500, the main gauge of US equities, is basically flat. And there's a lot of discussion in the market about what is going on here. A big part of it, if you come with me as my Bloomberg Terminal M, it seems seems to be key man risk. That is, we know from Twitter, for anyone that's paid any attention to the platform in the last 24 hours or the last few months, Elon Musk is tweeting very regularly. He's kind of very focused based on the reporting that Kurt Wagner and I have done on this platform and its future. And there's concern out there from Tesla shareholders who have voiced this concern on the platform that he's distracted being away from Tesla. There's less of a conversation now about the concern of him selling down more of his own Tesla shares in order to finance the Twitter deal because of what we know, what he did both on the debt and on the equity co-investor side. But clearly there's an overhang here, and it's just strange to see such poor performance in Tesla stock, both in the short, medium, and long terms.
Ed, this is sort of a perennial question, but I wonder if the answer to it is changing. Is Tesla a tech stock, or is it a car stock? And how are investors thinking about it?
I will take a perennial question from you any day of the week. I mean, it is the question. You know, 50% of the sell-side analysts that cover Tesla do so from a sort of classic automotive perspective. Many treat it as a higher multiple tech or software play, right? Because much of its valuation in recent years has been based on the future promise of full self-driving. Ultimately, I look at the fundamentals, right? This is a stock that trades at 47 times forward earnings. If you compare with General Motors, for example, that's a stock that trades below 7 times forward earnings. At 47 times forward earnings, that is a stretched multiple stock in anyone's book. You know, we've talked a lot about NVIDIA, for example, trading at 30 times forward earnings. That's nowhere near what Tesla's at right now. So that's not a definitive answer to the question. I'm sorry to sort of bat you away, but it depends how you look at it. If you look at the fundamentals, Tesla does not trade like a legacy automotive name.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, thank you as always. More perennial questions to come. Okay, coming up, how midterm voters will impact crypto regulation. That's next. This is Bloomberg. The U.S. midterm elections are coming up, and the crypto industry has its eyes on Congress. Question: after the vote, will we finally get progress on crypto regulation? Bloomberg's Kaylee Lines reports.
Our regulators and, frankly, our Congress is an hour late and $1 short, and we need to catch up with where these cryptocurrencies are going.
Congress has been calling for greater regulation of crypto for years, but it's been a lot of talk, and to this point, not a lot of walk.
We have the intention, we're just not quite getting it over the line.
The crypto industry has been asking Congress to help create the rules of the road, but optimism on progress has faded as the midterms draw closer.
There was some hope from many in industry that this was actually going to happen this year, that a bunch of bills that had been proposed were promising, that we could actually see some movement here on Capitol Hill. But just like pretty much everything in Washington, heading towards the end of 2022, it all seems kind of stuck right now.
The bills that have gained the most traction include legislation to regulate stablecoins and to give the CFTC more power to oversee digital assets. But success on those initiatives will have to wait until after the midterms.
I think both Kirsten and I believe that the bill in one piece as a total bill is more likely to be deferred until next year. It's a big topic, it's comprehensive, and it's still new to many U.S. senators. It's a lot for them to digest with the few remaining weeks we have in this calendar year.
Big names in crypto like Sam Bankman-Fried, the billionaire founder of FTX, are also trying to make change with their dollars, emerging as influential political donors. While he says he's motivated primarily by pandemic prevention and wants to support candidates who will prioritize that, he also has been pushing the regulatory agenda.
I have a duty as a member of the industry to try and get us regulated, to try and move the industry in a more responsible direction. And I think that requires engagement. I think it would be irresponsible for me not to engage, with Capitol Hill, with regulators. And the things that I've been arguing for are more regulation for the industry. I think that's what's right for the country.
Bankman-Fried is the fourth largest individual donor this midterm cycle and has made about $40 million in political contributions this year. He has said he could give even more in the 2024 race.
I think that you're going to see more people pushing into politics because now the interaction with DC is going to be one of the main drivers of whether enterprises are able to grow and operate successfully.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons with that report. Coming up, Election Day almost here, and working women in the U.S. want to be heard. We're going to talk about all that and more with the founder of Girls Who Code and the Marshall Plan for Moms, Reshma Saujani, next. This is Bloomberg.
As Americans decide the future of Congress and state legislatures.
Bloomberg will be live in Washington, D.C. to cover the results as they break and provide insight about what it means for the country.
We're in a divided country, and these are really close elections.
We take a look at what the races could mean for Wall Street.
Special election night coverage starts at 8 p.m. on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And tune in to Surveillance live from D.C. at 6 a.m. on Wednesday for the latest overnight. This is Bloomberg.
Republican lawmakers have been working to revive former President Trump's bid to ban TikTok in recent months over fears that U.S. data is ending up in the hands of the Chinese government. Just last week, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr told Axios that TikTok should be outright banned. He joins me now for more on this. Commissioner Carr, thank you as always for taking the time. You said specifically you don't believe there's a path forward for anything other than a ban, which is a step up from what you said in the past. Why take it that far?
Look, it seems almost every week there's a new leaked material coming out of TikTok that just really eviscerates the trust. And at the end of the day, the national security agencies have been working on what's known as Project Texas, which is to move a lot of TikTok's operations to Oracle servers here in the U.S., and that's the response to national security concerns. The problem with that is there's a new report about 10 days ago from Forbes that had a TikTok official out of L.A. having an unusual outside business hour meeting where they were asking another TikTok employee detailed questions about the location and other details of those Oracle servers. We also have leaked materials from a DC TikTok official that said once that Project Texas is put in place, it remains to be seen if Beijing can still get access to U.S. user data, because at the end of the day, these are their tools that they built in China. So if TikTok isn't sure that these new protections will safeguard U.S. user data, then I don't think we should be so sure either.
Now, you don't have the authority to ban TikTok. So what are you hoping to accomplish with this assertion?
Yeah, that's right. This isn't like Huawei or ZTE or China Mobile, where we at the FCC had federal funding at issue or FCC license at issue. But what I gained from all those cases was some insight into dealing with companies that have ties back into communist China and sort of malign data flows. And so I'm happy to sort of bring that expertise to bear and talk about it. But the reality is this is broad and bipartisan. You've got Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat chairman of Senate Intel, who looks at a lot of really interesting security briefings every day. And he has said that it is TikTok that scares the dickens out of him. You have just last week, Democrat Chairwoman Schakowsky in the House. She wrote a letter with Republican Bill Aracas to Apple and Google saying, we're concerned about your continued inclusion of TikTok in the App Store. So this isn't just about me. This is about broad, deep, bipartisan concern that's being expressed. And you're right. This ultimately, I think, in the lead is going to be Treasury, which has the CFIUS process. And I think that should be the focus of federal action, is the Treasury CFIUS process, not the FCC, but it could potentially be the FTC or the Commerce Department as well.
So what do you hope to come out of that national security agreement with TikTok that we have at this moment?
I've been open, at least theoretically, for a while, that there is some agreement that's put in place that addresses national security concerns. But there was a New York Times piece a couple weeks ago that said there's a tentative deal that's been put in place, or a draft deal with TikTok, but then it had multiple high-level sources in the Justice Department saying that the number two in the DOJ is concerned that that tentative deal isn't tough enough. And so I think we have to be very careful here going forward that we're not allowing data flows back into China, because it's not just about espionage and foreign influence, but we're also feeding China's AI. And AI can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And the PLA and the CCP have set a goal of dominating AI. So I'm very concerned about us sending data back in a way that's going to improve and make that AI effective for nefarious purposes.
So the question is, how far do you take this? Should companies like Meta, Alphabet, Apple have employees in China, in your view, at all?
Well, look, I do think this is an opportunity here where we need to revisit these deep corporate ties into China, particularly as Xi saber rattles on Taiwan. Coming out of the Communist Party confab of last week, I was just in Taiwan for 2 days last week myself, and I think it is time to start thinking about diversifying outside of China. Now, up to now, my concern has been focused on individual companies and what I call plus factors, meaning it's not just that you have ties back into communist China, but there's something else there that's concerning. That was the case with Huawei, with ZTE, and that's the case with TikTok. So I'm not ready to make a broader pronouncement more generally about companies that are doing business there.
Now, we've got a midterm election happening in a matter of hours, and I'm curious what your hope is for, a new Congress, along with FTC Chair Lina Khan, to take action or not on big tech over the next couple of years.
Well, actually, election, obviously I sort of leave it to the American people to make their decisions there, particularly by the Hatch Act. I'm not in a position to make sort of partisan comments there. But what I'll say is generally, I do think it's important that we find some alignment, Republicans and Democrats alike, on addressing, outsized abuse of corporate power. And I do think we're starting to see more and more bipartisan interest in that topic. And I would always look forward to find partners on, both sides of the political aisle to drive towards that result. And again, when it comes to TikTok in particular, I mean, my sense is that the tide is moving out on TikTok. And again, you see almost every week new letters from new bipartisan members of Congress that are focused on this issue.
What's the latest on the plan to ban all Huawei and ZTE telecom equipment from the U.S. market? Is the FCC going to be voting on that soon?
We're making really good progress. A couple of years ago, we voted to withdraw all future funding for Huawei and ZTE equipment, and we're right now funding the ripping and replacing. Axios, I believe, had a report a couple of weeks ago that said that we're about to vote at the FCC on denying equipment authorization for those devices, which would close what I've described as a Huawei loophole, which means up to now, you can't use federal dollars to purchase this gear, but you can use private dollars, buy the same gear, put it in the same point in your network. And I've long called for us to close that loophole. So to the extent that Axios reporting is right, that the FCC is moving forward with that vote, and I don't want to get into the details of it, but suffice to say, I'd be very happy with that outcome at the FCC.
And quickly, at the FTC, what are your thoughts on the actions that Lina Khan has taken so far?
Look, I think our guiding principle has to be to protect individual liberty. We can have threats to individual liberty from the overreach of government, but we can also have threats to individual liberty from the abuse of corporate power. We've got to find a way here to have that as our guiding star. And I know it's been a partisan time at the FTC, and they've had a hard time agreeing at the FCC. We've been working to the middle, compromising and finding common ground, and I hope that we continue to do that at the FCC at least.
And last quick question, what's your response to the changes that Elon Musk is making at Twitter thus far? Do you like what you're seeing?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we end up with protecting a widespread of political views. At the end of the day, I think these are the modern version of the digital town square. But I don't think we need to just rely on the benevolence of Elon Musk or any other billionaire to come in and purchase a platform. That's why I've had my position for years now. We need some pro-speech guardrails. So let's protect political speech. Let's make sure there's not discrimination against it. Let's push for user empowerment, transparency, accountability. So while I'm hopeful that Elon Musk bends Twitter's content moderation towards a diversity of views, I don't think we should rely on that alone. I do think we should put regulations in place that are going to protect political speech in the digital town square.
All right. FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, thanks so much for stopping by. Appreciate it. Meantime, millions of mothers have left their jobs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The cause? Inadequate childcare. That is why Girls Who Code founder Resma Shahjani decided to come up with the Marshall Plan for Moms, a nonprofit that has helped pass landmark childcare legislation in New York and is working with big companies on employer-sponsored childcare. She joins me now for more. And obviously, Reshma, I have to ask you about the midterms, which we are now hours away from. Which races are you paying the closest attention to, and why?
All of them. I mean, this election is the most important election that women have seen. You know, following the Dobbs decision, women have essentially become second-class citizens in America. And, you know, we have a lot of extremists on the ballot, a lot of candidates, you know, on the right who want to restrict our rights even more. And so what happens in Tuesday is going to fundamentally change the lives of American women.
How concerned are you about misinformation, given I know that you have pointed out the voices of women, especially, have not been heard?
I mean, I'm very concerned about misinformation. And I think it's something that it's critical that a lot of my students, for example, are working on. And I think the comment that was just made, you know, by the commissioner and seeing what happens, you know, with Twitter and with Elon Musk taking over Twitter to make sure that we continue to root out disinformation and that everybody has access to fair and just and reliable information is critical.
That was my next question. I'm curious what your take is on the direction that Elon Musk has taken Twitter thus far, and how free speech can be balanced with safety and security and healthy dialogue.
I'm watching it, Emily. You know, we know that social media, Twitter, has been a toxic place for women and girls and for people of color, and that there's got to be a way to kind of moderate content without making people feel like every day that they're going to face some amount of abuse or be called a name or be, you know, showed content that's going to be really, you know, toxic for them. So I think that, again, this is an opportunity to do something right and to do something that, you know, again, uplifts people of color and women. We'll see if that actually happens.
Now, given your work with the Marshall Plan for Moms, I'm curious what you're hearing from moms and parents right now about their concerns as they head into the election. What matters to them right now and why?
Look, I mean, I think Republicans have made it seem that the biggest concern you should have is the cost of gas or the cost of cereal. But if you talk to a mom, she'll tell you my biggest concern is the cost of childcare. 40% of parents have gone into debt because of the cost of childcare. The cost of childcare is outpacing the cost of inflation. It is literally the most expensive line item for families. And the only party that's tried to do something about it is Democrats, you know, through the Build Back Better bill. So, you know, mom's got to be paying attention. Mom's got to be voting on Tuesday. And, you know, we got to be making sure that we're pushing an agenda that is going to put families first. And if we want to say that women in the workforce are not just a nice to have, but a must have, then we have to make sure that we're providing affordable childcare. And that's what we're doing at the Marshall Plan for Moms with our National Business Coalition for Childcare. We can't wait for government to do the right thing. We can push them to, but in the meantime, we have to advocate for subsidizing childcare in the workforce.
You recently went toe-to-toe with a parents' rights group that banned Girls Who Code books. And I'm curious if you can share some context on that. And what do you think it tells us about the state of America?
I think it tells us that they were coming for our bodies and now they're coming for our minds. I mean, Emily, I woke up to a headline that Girls Who Code books had been banned in Pennsylvania. And it wasn't just Girls Who Code books. It was books about Grace Hopper, you know, books that were going to get girls an opportunity, girls of color, an opportunity to be everything and anything. You know, what is happening in schools right now, what is happening in terms of the school board fights and the culture wars is critical. And we have to start paying attention. Again, I cannot stress this enough. You know, we've entered this period of forced birth where our reproductive rights have been taken away. And I am shocked to see what they are trying to take away from our girls. And every single parent who cares about their girls having a chance to be an engineer, to be a doctor, to be a president, needs to be informed about what's happening in the schools, because it is shocking, it's frightening, and it's scary.
How much progress last quick question, is actually happening in the schools? You know, you founded this company to get more girls to learn how to code. How optimistic are you about that, you know, truly happening across the board?
Listen, Emily, COVID was devastating, you know, for kids, especially for kids from underserved communities. I saw so many of my students who are on their way to learning computer science had to drop out of college or not go to college because their moms were essential workers and they had to take care of their siblings. That is why it's so critical that we fix the broken structure of care. The second thing is that we have got to continue to invest in public school education. I'm sure you saw the New York Times article about how, the math and science, rates of what our kids are learning in schools have diminished and decreased. I know that's happening. We had 10,000 Girls Who Code clubs at the start of the pandemic, and we are now inching back to where we were before. And so when teachers are exhausted and tired, when they're not getting paid adequately, they're not volunteering to teach a coding club. And again, who can blame them? And so we got to have to continue to invest in our public school education and make sure that our kids have access to opportunity and the jobs of the future, which include coding.
Resmaa Shaujani, thank you for your advocacy for Girls Who Code founder. Appreciate you stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Coming up on Election Day here in the United States, we've got an all-star lineup, including Lyft's President John Zimmer. He'll be talking about Prop 30 and the future of the gig economy and so many other important guests. And don't forget to check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This is Bloomberg.